Chapter 1: The Science of Thinking Faster. Every single day, your brain processes roughly 35,000 decisions. From the moment you wake up to the second you fall asleep, you're constantly taking in information, analyzing patterns, making judgments, and choosing actions. Some of these decisions happen so fast you don't even notice them. Others drag on for hours, leaving you mentally exhausted and still uncertain. The difference between these two experiences comes down to one critical factor: the speed and efficiency of your thinking. Most people assume that intelligence is fixed, that you're either born smart or you're not. But here's what neuroscience has revealed over the past 2 decades: cognitive speed, mental clarity, and decision-making ability are skills you can develop. Your brain is not a static organ. It's a dynamic system that adapts based on how you use it. And just like you can train your body to run faster or lift heavier weights, you can train your mind to process information more efficiently, make decisions with greater confidence, and think with remarkable speed. This chapter is about understanding the mechanics behind fast thinking. We're going to explore how your brain actually processes information, why some thoughts move like lightning while others crawl through mud, and what habits are secretly slowing you down without you even realizing it. By the end, you'll have a clear framework for understanding your cognitive machinery and specific strategies to optimize it. Let's start with the fundamental question: how does your brain actually process information? When you encounter any stimulus, whether it's a question someone asks you, a problem at work, or even just deciding what to eat for lunch, your brain initiates a complex sequence of electrical and chemical events. Information enters through your sensory systems and travels to the thalamus, which acts like a relay station, directing signals to the appropriate regions of your cortex. From there, different brain regions activate depending on the type of information you're processing. For visual information, signals move to the occipital lobe at the back of your head. For language, they route to the temporal and frontal regions. For decision-making and executive function, your prefrontal cortex lights up. All of this happens in milliseconds. But here's where it gets interesting: the speed at which these signals travel and the efficiency with which they're processed varies dramatically from person to person and even within the same person at different times. The speed of neural transmission depends largely on something called myelination. Myelin is a fatty coating that wraps around the axons of your neurons, similar to the insulation around electrical wires. The more myelin you have, the faster electrical impulses can travel between brain cells. This is why certain skills become faster with practice. When you repeatedly engage in an activity, whether it's playing piano, solving math problems, or reading, your brain actually increases the myelination of the neural pathways involved. This is the biological basis of practice makes perfect. You're literally building faster highways in your brain. But speed isn't just about how fast signals travel. It's also about how efficiently your brain can access stored information and make connections between different pieces of knowledge. This is where the concept of neural networks becomes crucial. Your memories, skills, and knowledge aren't stored in isolated compartments. They exist as interconnected webs of associations. The stronger and more numerous these connections, the faster you can retrieve relevant information and apply it to new situations. Think about an expert chess player. When they look at a board, they don't analyze each piece individually. Instead, they instantly recognize patterns they've seen thousands of times before. Their brain has built such strong neural networks around chess positions that pattern recognition happens almost instantaneously. This same principle applies to any domain of expertise. The faster you can recognize patterns and access relevant knowledge, the faster you can think. Now let's talk about the 2 fundamental modes of thinking that govern how you process information. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for his research on this topic, which he later popularized in his book Thinking, Fast and Slow. He identified 2 distinct systems that operate in your brain, which he simply called System 1 and System 2. System 1 is your fast, automatic, intuitive thinking mode. It operates effortlessly and unconsciously. When you read emotions on someone's face, when you understand simple sentences, when you drive on an empty road, when you answer what 2 plus 2 equals, you're using System 1. This system is incredibly fast because it relies on pattern recognition, heuristics, and learned associations. It doesn't require conscious effort, and it can process vast amounts of information simultaneously. System 2 is your slow, deliberate, analytical thinking mode. It kicks in when you need to solve complex problems, when you're learning something new, when you're making important decisions that require careful consideration. If I asked you to multiply 37 by 48 in your head, you'd need System 2. When you're trying to park in a tight space, when you're filling out tax forms, when you're comparing different investment options, System 2 is running the show. This mode is slow because it requires conscious attention, logical reasoning, and working memory. Here's the crucial insight: most of what we experience as slow thinking isn't because we lack intelligence. It's because we're forcing System 2 to handle tasks that System 1 could manage if we had the right training and preparation. When you struggle to make decisions quickly, when you feel mentally foggy, when you can't seem to think clearly under pressure, it's often because your System 1 isn't sufficiently developed for the tasks you're facing. The goal isn't to always think fast. Some decisions genuinely require careful, slow analysis. But most people operate far below their potential cognitive speed because they haven't trained their System 1 effectively. They're using their slow, effortful System 2 for tasks that could be automated through practice and proper mental frameworks. Let me give you a practical example. When you first learned to drive, it required enormous mental effort. You had to consciously think about every movement. Checking mirrors, adjusting speed, steering, watching for obstacles. Your System 2 was working overtime, which is why you felt exhausted after just an hour of driving. But after months of practice, driving became largely automatic. You can now hold conversations, listen to podcasts, and think about completely unrelated topics while safely operating a vehicle. Driving has been transferred from System 2 to System 1. This same transfer can happen with mental skills. Decision-making frameworks, problem-solving strategies, analytical thinking, even creativity can become faster and more automatic through deliberate practice. The key is understanding which mental processes can be optimized and how to train them effectively. So why does mental speed matter in modern life? Because the pace of information, decision-making, and change has accelerated dramatically. 50 years ago, most people worked in environments where they could think slowly. Decisions could wait. Information arrived gradually. Today, you're bombarded with data, opportunities, and choices at unprecedented rates. Email, messages, notifications, meetings, deadlines, all competing for your limited attention and requiring quick responses. In this environment, cognitive speed isn't just about convenience. It's about effectiveness. The person who can quickly assess a situation, identify the core issue, and decide on an appropriate response has a massive advantage. They experience less stress because they're not constantly overwhelmed by backlogs of unmade decisions. They seize opportunities that others miss because they're still analyzing. They make fewer mistakes because they can process warning signs before problems escalate. Mental speed also compounds over time. If you can think and decide just 20% faster than your peers, you'll accomplish dramatically more over the course of a year. You'll learn faster because you can process new information more efficiently. You'll solve problems faster because you can test potential solutions more rapidly. You'll build expertise faster because your neural networks develop more quickly. But here's what most people don't realize: you're probably thinking slower than you're capable of, not because of any inherent limitation, but because of habits that quietly sabotage your cognitive performance. These are invisible patterns you've developed, often with good intentions, that create mental drag. The first major habit that slows down thinking is information overload without processing time. Your brain isn't designed to constantly absorb new information without consolidation. When you jump from task to task, scroll through endless feeds, consume content without reflection, you're filling your working memory with random bits of data that haven't been properly integrated. This creates mental clutter. Your System 1 can't develop effective patterns because the information landscape keeps shifting. Your System 2 gets exhausted from constant context switching. Think of your brain like a computer. If you open hundreds of browser tabs and dozens of applications simultaneously, everything slows down. Your processing power gets divided among too many tasks. The same thing happens in your mind. Every piece of unprocessed information, every unmade decision, every unresolved problem occupies mental resources. This is why people often report thinking more clearly after a vacation or even just a good night's sleep. You've given your brain time to process and consolidate information. The second habit is decision avoidance. When you encounter a decision and don't make it, that decision doesn't disappear. It sits in your working memory, consuming mental energy. Research shows that unmade decisions drain cognitive resources continuously until they're resolved. This is called decision fatigue, but it's actually more insidious than just fatigue. Each pending decision creates a background process in your mind, slightly slowing down everything else you try to do. Successful people aren't necessarily smarter than others. They're often just faster at making decisions, which frees up their cognitive resources for other tasks. They've developed clear decision-making frameworks that allow their System 1 to handle routine choices automatically, reserving System 2 for genuinely complex decisions. The third habit is multitasking, which is really just rapid task switching. Your brain can't actually focus on two cognitively demanding tasks simultaneously. What you experience as multitasking is your attention rapidly bouncing between tasks. Every switch carries a cost. Research indicates that it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully regain deep focus after an interruption. Even brief interruptions, like checking a phone notification, create cognitive residue that slows your thinking for several minutes afterward. When you're constantly switching between tasks, you never achieve the mental state where thinking becomes fast and fluid. You're always in the startup phase, never reaching optimal processing speed. This is why people who protect blocks of uninterrupted time consistently report greater mental clarity and faster thinking. The fourth habit is physical neglect. Your brain is a physical organ that requires specific conditions to operate at peak performance. When you're dehydrated, even by just 2%, cognitive speed decreases measurably. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function and clear thinking, essentially goes offline. When you're eating a diet high in processed sugars and low in nutrients, you're depriving your neurons of the building blocks they need for optimal function. Many people try to improve their thinking through mental exercises alone while ignoring the physical foundation that supports cognitive performance. This is like trying to drive a car faster while ignoring engine maintenance. Your brain consumes 20% of your body's energy despite being only 2% of your body weight. It's extraordinarily metabolically demanding. Feed it poorly, deprive it of sleep, keep it dehydrated, and no amount of mental training will overcome that handicap. The fifth habit is passive consumption versus active engagement. When you watch videos, scroll through social media, or consume content without actively engaging with it, you're training your brain to be passive. You're strengthening the neural pathways associated with receiving information rather than processing it. Fast thinking requires active engagement. It requires asking questions, making predictions, connecting new information to existing knowledge, testing your understanding. The difference is enormous. Someone who reads a book while actively taking notes, questioning assumptions, and thinking about applications will develop much faster thinking skills than someone who passively consumes the same content. The active learner is constantly exercising their System 2, which strengthens it over time. They're also building richer neural networks, which improves their System 1 pattern recognition. The sixth habit is comfort seeking in cognitive tasks. Your brain becomes faster at what it practices regularly. If you consistently avoid challenging mental tasks, if you always choose the easier option, if you rely on external tools for every calculation or decision, you're not developing your cognitive capabilities. This is the mental equivalent of always taking the elevator instead of the stairs. You maintain your current level at best, but more likely, you're slowly declining. Mental challenge is how you build cognitive speed. When you push yourself to solve difficult problems, when you force yourself to make decisions without all the information you'd like, when you deliberately practice tasks at the edge of your current ability, you're triggering the biological processes that increase myelination and strengthen neural networks. You're literally building a faster brain. The seventh habit is negative self-talk about cognitive ability. The stories you tell yourself about your thinking matter more than most people realize. If you repeatedly tell yourself, "I'm not good at math," "I can't make quick decisions, I'm a slow learner," you're creating psychological barriers that become self-fulfilling prophecies. Your brain tends to perform according to your expectations. Neuroscience research on growth mindset, pioneered by psychologist Carol Dweck, has demonstrated that people who believe their abilities can improve through effort consistently outperform those with fixed mindsets, even when they start at the same baseline. This isn't just positive thinking. It's about how your beliefs shape your behavior. If you believe you can get faster at thinking, you'll engage in the practices that make it happen. If you believe you're stuck at your current speed, you won't even try. Understanding these habits is the first step toward changing them. You can't fix problems you don't recognize. Most people have spent years unknowingly training their brains to think slowly. They've optimized for comfort rather than performance. They've chosen easy over effective. They've accumulated mental habits that create cognitive drag. But here's the empowering truth. Because these habits are learned, they can be unlearned. Because your cognitive speed is the result of how you've trained your brain, you can retrain it. The neural pathways that make you think slowly can be weakened through disuse, while new, faster pathways are built through deliberate practice. Over the coming chapters, we're going to dive deep into specific strategies for optimizing every aspect of your cognitive performance. You'll learn how to build decision-making frameworks that allow you to choose quickly and confidently. You'll discover techniques for dramatically improving your memory and information retention. You'll understand how to enter flow states where thinking becomes effortless and fast. You'll learn how to structure your environment and habits to support peak mental performance. But all of that practical work rests on the foundation we've built in this chapter. Understanding how your brain actually processes information, recognizing the two modes of thinking, appreciating why mental speed matters, and identifying the invisible habits that have been holding you back. Your brain is capable of processing information far faster than you currently experience. The gap between your current performance and your potential isn't about lacking intelligence. It's about training and optimization. Just as an athlete can dramatically improve their speed through proper training, you can dramatically improve your cognitive speed through deliberate practice and systematic optimization. The question isn't whether you can think faster. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to make it happen. Because here's what I've observed after years of studying high performers across different fields. The people who think fastest aren't necessarily the ones who started with the most natural ability. They're the ones who took their cognitive development seriously. They treated their brain like the sophisticated instrument it is and systematically optimized its performance. You have that same opportunity. Starting right now, you can begin building a faster, clearer, more capable mind. The journey begins with awareness, continues with deliberate practice, and leads to a level of mental performance most people never imagine is possible. Let's begin. Chapter 2: Training your brain for speed. Understanding how your brain works is one thing. Actually training it to perform at higher speeds is another entirely. This chapter is where theory meets practice. You're about to learn specific, actionable techniques that will dramatically increase your cognitive speed, sharpen your mental clarity, and reduce the friction that slows down your thinking. These aren't abstract concepts or motivational ideas. These are practical exercises you can start using today to build a faster, more efficient mind. Think of your brain like a high-performance engine. Even the best engine needs proper warm-up, regular maintenance, and the right fuel to operate at peak capacity. Most people try to jump straight into demanding cognitive tasks without any preparation, then wonder why they feel sluggish, unfocused, or mentally exhausted. Athletes don't sprint at full speed without warming up first. Musicians don't perform complex pieces without practice exercises. Yet somehow, we expect our brains to instantly shift from rest mode to peak performance without any transition. Mental warm-up techniques are essential for activating your cognitive systems and preparing your brain for high-speed thinking. When you first wake up or when you're transitioning from one type of task to another, your neural networks aren't fully activated. Blood flow to your prefrontal cortex is lower. Neurotransmitter levels haven't reached optimal concentrations. Your working memory isn't fully online. A proper mental warm-up changes all of this within just a few minutes. Let me give you a simple but powerful warm-up sequence that elite performers use before important cognitive tasks. Start with what I call the quick calculation cascade. Set a timer for 2 minutes and perform rapid mental arithmetic. Start simple, add numbers like 7 plus 8, 12 plus 15, 23 plus 19. Don't write anything down. Do it all in your head. After 30 seconds, increase the difficulty. Multiply two-digit numbers, 12 times 6, 15 times 4, 23 times 3. If you make mistakes, that's fine. The goal isn't perfect accuracy. The goal is activation. What's happening in your brain during this exercise? You're forcing multiple cognitive systems to come online simultaneously. Your working memory has to hold numbers while performing operations. Your attention systems have to maintain focus. Your processing speed naturally increases as you push yourself to calculate faster. Blood flow to your prefrontal cortex increases. You're essentially revving up your mental engine. After 2 minutes of calculation, immediately shift to a verbal exercise. Pick any common object in your environment, let's say a coffee cup, and spend 1 minute listing as many uses for it as you can imagine. Not just the obvious ones. Push yourself to think creatively. A coffee cup could be a planter, a percussion instrument, a paint container, a cookie cutter, a speaker amplifier for your phone, a doorstop, a measuring tool. Force yourself to generate at least 15 ideas in 60 seconds. This exercise activates different neural networks than the calculation exercise. You're now engaging creative thinking, divergent reasoning, and semantic memory. You're also practicing rapid idea generation, which is a crucial component of fast thinking. The combination of calculation and creative ideation warms up both analytical and creative cognitive systems, preparing your brain for whatever type of thinking you need to do next. Here's another powerful warm-up technique. The speed reading sprint. Take any article or book and give yourself exactly 3 minutes to read as much as you can while still maintaining comprehension. Don't subvocalize, meaning don't pronounce words in your head as you read. Instead, let your eyes move rapidly across the text, absorbing chunks of meaning rather than individual words. After 3 minutes, write down or mentally summarize the key points you captured. This exercise does several things simultaneously. It trains your visual processing speed. It forces your brain to extract meaning from incomplete information, which is a critical skill for fast thinking in real-world situations where you rarely have perfect data. It also builds confidence in your ability to process information rapidly, which reduces the psychological friction that often slows people down. Now, once your brain is warmed up, you need to understand how to leverage one of your most powerful cognitive capabilities. Rapid association. Your brain is essentially an association machine. Every piece of information you know is connected to other pieces through neural pathways. The faster you can move through these associations, the faster you can think, solve problems, and generate ideas. Most people use their associative abilities passively. They wait for connections to occur naturally. But you can actively train this capacity and dramatically increase its speed and reliability. Here's how. Set a timer for 5 minutes and pick 2 completely random words. Let's say elephant and keyboard. Your task is to create a chain of associations connecting these 2 words in as few steps as possible, but do it as quickly as you can. Elephant might make you think of memory, because of the phrase, memory like an elephant. Memory makes you think of computer. Computer connects directly to keyboard. That's 4 steps, completed in maybe 10 seconds. Now pick 2 more random words and repeat. Do this 10 times in 5 minutes. Your goal is to get faster and to reduce the number of steps required. What you're doing is strengthening the neural pathways between different knowledge domains. You're teaching your brain to move rapidly across conceptual boundaries. This might seem like a game, but it's actually building the same cognitive flexibility that allows experts to see connections others miss and solve problems others find baffling. When Steve Jobs talked about creativity being about connecting things, this is the skill he was describing. Here's a more advanced variation. Pick a complex problem you're currently facing, any problem in your work or personal life. Now spend 3 minutes rapidly associating it with unrelated domains. If your problem is about improving team communication, force yourself to associate it with cooking, then with gardening, then with music, then with architecture. Don't think carefully about whether the associations make sense. Just make them as fast as possible. Cooking and communication both require the right ingredients and the right proportions, both can be ruined by bad timing, both improve with preparation. Gardening and communication both require regular maintenance, both need the right environment to flourish, both benefit from removing weeds or toxic elements. Music and communication both require rhythm and timing, both can be harmonic or discordant, both improve with practice. By forcing rapid associations with unrelated domains, you're accessing different mental models and frameworks that can provide fresh insights into your problem. This is how creative breakthroughs happen. They're not magical moments of inspiration. They're the result of your brain making unexpected connections between previously unrelated concepts. You can train this ability deliberately through rapid association exercises. Pattern recognition is perhaps the single most important factor in cognitive speed. When you can instantly recognize patterns, you can respond to situations almost immediately because you've already encountered similar configurations before. This is how chess masters can play speed chess at incredibly high levels. This is how experienced doctors can diagnose conditions that would take others hours to analyze. This is how expert traders can make split-second decisions in volatile markets. The key to activating and improving pattern recognition is exposure to high-quality patterns combined with feedback. Let me give you a concrete example using a domain most people can relate to: decision-making patterns. Over the next week, every time you make a decision, any decision, categorize it into one of 3 types: reversible decisions, consequential but reversible decisions, or irreversible decisions. Reversible decisions are things like what to eat for lunch, which route to take to work, what to watch on television. These decisions can be unmade or changed easily with minimal consequences. Consequential but reversible decisions are things like taking a new job, moving to a new city, starting a relationship. These decisions matter and have significant effects, but they can be reversed if they don't work out, even if reversal is costly. Irreversible decisions are things like having children, certain major financial commitments, or choices that permanently close off other options. Most people treat all decisions as if they're equally important and deserving of careful analysis. This is a massive waste of cognitive energy. By training yourself to rapidly categorize decisions, you develop a pattern recognition system that automatically routes decisions to the appropriate level of analysis. Reversible decisions can be made almost instantly by System 1. You don't need to carefully deliberate about lunch. Just pick something, eat it, and move on. If it wasn't great, you'll choose differently tomorrow. This single pattern recognition skill can save you hours of mental energy every week, energy that can be redirected toward decisions that actually matter. But it's just one example. You can develop pattern recognition frameworks for any domain you regularly work in. Here's an exercise that builds general pattern recognition speed. Find a collection of complex images, maybe art photographs or abstract designs. Look at each image for exactly 3 seconds, then look away and try to describe or draw what you saw from memory. The goal isn't perfect recall. The goal is rapid pattern extraction. What were the dominant colors? What was the composition? What stood out? This trains your visual processing systems to extract the essential patterns from complex stimuli quickly. The same principle applies to text, to conversations, to data, to any information stream. You're teaching your brain to identify what matters and ignore what doesn't, and to do it faster. Another powerful pattern recognition exercise involves studying expert decision-making in your field. Find case studies, watch recordings of experts at work, analyze their choices. But here's the key. Before you see what they decided, pause and make your own decision. Then compare your thinking to theirs. Where did you align? Where did you differ? What patterns did they recognize that you missed? Over time, you'll internalize the patterns that experts use. You'll develop the same intuitions they have. What looks like natural talent or genius is usually just highly developed pattern recognition built through thousands of hours of deliberate exposure and feedback. You can compress this timeline by studying expert patterns systematically rather than waiting for random exposure. Now let's talk about cognitive friction, because this is what actually slows most people down in practice. Cognitive friction is any unnecessary mental resistance that impedes the flow of thinking. It's like trying to run through water instead of air. You're expending energy overcoming resistance rather than making forward progress. The first source of cognitive friction is unclear thinking goals. When you sit down to think through a problem or make a decision, if you don't have a clear endpoint in mind, your brain wanders. It explores tangents. It revisits the same ground repeatedly. You end up spending an hour thinking without making any real progress. The solution is to define your thinking goal with precision before you start. Instead of "I need to think about my career," specify exactly what you're trying to determine. I need to decide whether to pursue the management track or remain in a specialist role, and I need to identify the top 3 factors that should influence this decision. Now your brain has a target. It can move directly toward that target instead of wandering aimlessly. The second source of cognitive friction is insufficient working memory capacity. Your working memory is like RAM in a computer. It's where you hold and manipulate information while you're actively thinking about it. Most people can hold about 4 chunks of information in working memory simultaneously. When you try to think about problems that involve more pieces than this, you start forgetting elements, losing track of your reasoning, and having to restart your thinking process. The solution is to externalize your thinking. Write things down. Use diagrams. Create visual representations of complex problems. This isn't a weakness. It's a strategy that elite thinkers use constantly. By externalizing parts of the problem, you free up working memory to focus on analysis and synthesis rather than mere retention. Here's a specific technique: when facing a complex decision, write down every relevant factor on a separate index card or sticky note. Now you can physically arrange and rearrange these factors, grouping related ones, identifying patterns, testing different prioritizations. This external representation allows you to think about problems that would be impossible to hold entirely in your head. The third source of cognitive friction is decision-making without frameworks. Every time you face a decision without a predetermined framework for making that type of decision, you have to reinvent the decision-making process from scratch. This is exhaustingly slow. Instead, develop decision-making frameworks for common categories of choices you face regularly. For example, if you frequently need to prioritize tasks, create a simple framework: urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, neither urgent nor important. This is the Eisenhower matrix, and it takes about 5 seconds to categorize any task once you've internalized the framework. Without the framework, the same prioritization might take several minutes of internal debate. Build frameworks for hiring decisions, for investment choices, for time allocation, for relationship boundaries, for any recurring decision type in your life. Each framework you create eliminates friction from future decisions in that category. Over time, this compounds into massive time and energy savings. The fourth source of cognitive friction is environmental distraction. Your brain can't think fast when it's constantly interrupted by external stimuli. Every notification, every background conversation, every visual distraction forces your attention to shift, which creates cognitive load and slows your thinking. The solution is ruthless environmental design. When you need to think quickly and clearly, create an environment that supports that goal. Silence your phone. Close unnecessary browser tabs. Use noise-canceling headphones if you're in a shared space. Clear your visual field of clutter. These might seem like small things, but their cumulative effect on cognitive speed is enormous. I want to give you a challenge that ties all of these concepts together. For the next 7 days, commit to a daily cognitive training routine. Spend the first 5 minutes doing mental warm-ups, quick calculations, creative ideation, speed reading. Spend the next 10 minutes on rapid association exercises, connecting random concepts, applying cross-domain thinking to your current problems. Spend 5 minutes studying and categorizing patterns in your domain of expertise or interest. Finally, identify one source of cognitive friction in your daily life and systematically eliminate it. Maybe it's creating a decision framework for a choice you make repeatedly. Maybe it's externalizing a complex problem you've been trying to hold in your head. Maybe it's redesigning your workspace to minimize distractions. Track your results. Notice how your thinking speed changes over the week. Pay attention to how quickly you can generate ideas, make decisions, and solve problems compared to before you started this training. What you'll discover is that cognitive speed isn't a fixed trait. It's a skill that responds dramatically to focused practice. Here's something most people never realize: the feeling of being a fast thinker, of having mental clarity, of making decisions with confidence, these aren't qualities reserved for a genetically gifted few. They're the natural result of training your brain the same way you train any other skill. You warm up properly. You practice deliberately. You reduce unnecessary friction. You build pattern recognition through exposure and feedback. Think about professional athletes for a moment. They don't just show up and play. They have elaborate warm-up routines. They practice specific skills thousands of times. They study game footage to recognize patterns. They optimize every aspect of their environment in preparation for peak performance. They treat their physical abilities as trainable skills that can be systematically improved. Your cognitive abilities deserve the same approach. Every technique I've described in this chapter is based on how your brain actually works, on the neuroscience of learning and performance, on what elite thinkers actually do even if they don't explicitly articulate it. The rapid calculation exercises increase blood flow to your prefrontal cortex and activate your working memory systems. The association exercises strengthen the neural pathways between different knowledge domains and improve your ability to make creative connections. The pattern recognition training builds the mental models that allow System 1 to handle complex tasks automatically. The friction reduction techniques eliminate the environmental and procedural obstacles that slow your thinking. None of this is complicated. You don't need special equipment or extensive training. You just need to take your cognitive development seriously and practice these techniques consistently. The improvement curve is steep at first. You'll notice changes within days. Your thinking will feel more fluid. Decisions that used to take hours will take minutes. Problems that seemed impossibly complex will become manageable. But here's the thing about building cognitive speed. It's not just about thinking faster for its own sake. It's about what becomes possible when you can process information and make decisions more efficiently. You have more mental energy left at the end of the day. You feel less overwhelmed by complexity. You can engage with more challenging problems because you have the cognitive capacity to handle them. You also make better decisions, not despite thinking faster, but because of it. When you can rapidly generate and evaluate multiple options, you're more likely to find optimal solutions. When you can quickly recognize patterns from past experience, you avoid repeating mistakes. When you eliminate decision-making friction, you spend your analytical energy on what actually matters rather than wasting it on trivial choices. There's also a psychological benefit that people rarely discuss. When you know you can think quickly and clearly, you approach challenges with confidence rather than anxiety. You don't avoid difficult problems because you trust your ability to work through them efficiently. This confidence creates a positive feedback loop. You take on harder challenges, which builds more capability, which increases your confidence further. I've worked with executives, entrepreneurs, students, and professionals across dozens of industries, and the pattern is always the same. The people who achieve exceptional results aren't working with fundamentally different brains. They've just trained their cognitive abilities more deliberately. They treat thinking as a skill to be developed rather than a fixed capacity to be worked around. You can do the same thing starting right now. You can implement the mental warm-up routine before important cognitive tasks. You can practice rapid association exercises during downtime. You can systematically build pattern recognition in your field. You can identify and eliminate sources of cognitive friction one by one. The question isn't whether these techniques work. The neuroscience is clear, and the practical results are consistent. The question is whether you'll actually do them. Because here's what I've learned. Most people want the results of fast thinking, they want the mental clarity, they want the decision-making confidence, but they're not willing to put in the practice. They'll read about these techniques, think they're interesting, maybe try one or two once, and then go back to their old habits. They'll continue struggling with mental fog, decision paralysis, and cognitive overload, all while having the knowledge to fix these problems sitting unused in their minds. Don't be that person. Treat your cognitive development with the same seriousness you'd treat physical fitness or professional skills. Your brain is the most important tool you have. Everything you accomplish in life flows through your cognitive abilities. Investing time in training them is the highest leverage activity you can engage in. Start small if you need to. Even 5 minutes a day of deliberate cognitive training will produce noticeable results within a week. Build from there. Add new techniques as old ones become habitual. Track your progress. Notice when you're thinking faster, deciding more confidently, seeing patterns more clearly. And remember this: speed without accuracy is just recklessness, but accuracy without speed means you'll be outpaced by people who've learned to do both. The goal is calibrated speed, where you're moving as fast as possible while maintaining the level of precision the situation requires. That's what separates truly exceptional thinkers from everyone else. The techniques in this chapter give you the foundation for building that capability. Use them consistently, and you'll be amazed at how much faster and clearer your thinking becomes. Your brain has extraordinary potential. It's time to unlock it. Chapter 3: Smarter Thinking, Tools for Clarity and Precision. Speed without intelligence is just noise. You can train yourself to think faster, to process information more quickly, to make decisions in less time, but if those decisions are wrong, if that thinking lacks clarity, if you're moving fast in the wrong direction, then all that speed is worthless. This chapter is about thinking smarter, not just faster. It's about developing the mental tools that allow you to achieve both velocity and precision simultaneously. The fundamental challenge of modern thinking is this: we're drowning in information but starving for clarity. You have access to more data, more opinions, more options than any human in history, but having information isn't the same as having understanding. Most people respond to this overload by either trying to consume everything, which leads to shallow processing and mental exhaustion, or by giving up and relying on superficial heuristics, which leads to poor decisions. There's a third path, and it's the one used by the clearest thinkers across every domain. They don't try to process everything. Instead, they use specific cognitive tools that allow them to extract maximum insight from minimal information. They organize complex data into manageable structures. They cut through surface complexity to identify fundamental principles. They develop shortcuts that enhance rather than diminish their understanding. And they maintain clarity even when thinking quickly under pressure. Let's start with perhaps the most powerful cognitive tool for managing complexity: chunking. Your brain has severe limitations when it comes to working memory. As I mentioned before, most people can hold about 4 items in conscious awareness simultaneously. This seems like a crippling constraint. How can you think about complex problems that involve dozens or hundreds of variables if you can only hold 4 things in mind at once? The answer is that you don't hold individual pieces of information. You hold chunks, organized clusters of related information that your brain treats as single units. A phone number like 555-867-5309 contains 10 digits. If you tried to remember it as 10 separate pieces of information, you'd struggle. But if you chunk it into 3 groups, 555, 867, and 5309, suddenly it becomes manageable. You're now holding 3 chunks instead of 10 digits. This same principle applies to infinitely more complex domains. A chess master doesn't see 32 individual pieces on a board. They see patterns, formations, strategic positions, each of which represents a chunk of information built from years of experience. A single glance tells them this is a French defense position with white having slight pressure on the queen side. That entire complex situation has been compressed into one chunk. You can deliberately build chunking systems for any domain you work in. Here's how. First, identify the recurring patterns, concepts, or configurations in your field. If you're in business, maybe it's customer segments, market conditions, competitive positions, financial metrics. If you're a writer, maybe it's narrative structures, character archetypes, thematic elements. If you're a programmer, maybe it's design patterns, algorithms, data structures. Second, create memorable labels or mental models for each chunk. The label serves as a handle that allows you to retrieve the entire cluster of related information. Instead of thinking about customers who are price-sensitive, make infrequent purchases, have low lifetime value, and require significant support resources, you think transactional customers. One label, one chunk, containing all that information. Third, practice recognizing these chunks in real situations until the recognition becomes automatic. Initially, you have to consciously analyze a situation to identify which chunk applies. But with practice, the recognition happens instantly, almost unconsciously. This is when chunking becomes truly powerful. You can look at a complex situation and immediately understand it in terms of your established chunks, which dramatically accelerates your thinking. Let me give you a practical exercise to build chunking skills. Pick a domain you work in regularly. Over the next week, every time you encounter a situation, problem, or pattern in that domain, ask yourself, what type of situation is this? Have I seen something similar before? Then create a label for that type and write down its key characteristics. By the end of the week, you'll have identified maybe 10 to 20 common patterns in your field. These become your initial chunks. Now start using these labels in your thinking and communication. Instead of describing situations from scratch every time, reference your chunks. This is a resource allocation problem with competing priorities. This is a stakeholder management situation with misaligned incentives. This is a technical debt decision. What you'll notice is that your thinking becomes both faster and clearer. Faster because you're processing organized chunks instead of scattered information. Clearer because you've identified the essential pattern and can ignore irrelevant details. This is how experts in any field develop their seemingly magical ability to quickly understand complex situations that leave novices baffled. But there's a danger with chunking, and it's important to address it. Sometimes your existing chunks can blind you to new patterns or unique situations. You see what you expect to see rather than what's actually there. This is where our next tool becomes critical: first principles thinking. First principles thinking is the practice of breaking down complex problems to their most fundamental truths and reasoning up from there, rather than reasoning by analogy or relying on existing frameworks. It's one of the most powerful tools for achieving clarity, especially when dealing with novel problems or when your usual approaches aren't working. Here's how it works in practice. When you face a problem, instead of immediately asking how is this usually solved, or what have others done in similar situations, you ask, what do I know to be absolutely true about this problem? What are the fundamental constraints and variables? Then you build up your understanding and solution from those foundational elements. Elon Musk famously used first principles thinking when starting SpaceX. The conventional wisdom was that rockets were extremely expensive, costing tens of millions of dollars. Instead of accepting this, Musk asked a first principles question. What are rockets made of? What do those raw materials cost? He discovered that the material cost of a rocket was only about 2% of the typical price. The rest was inefficient manufacturing, markup, and traditional aerospace industry practices. By reasoning from first principles rather than by analogy, he identified an opportunity to dramatically reduce costs. You don't need to be building rockets to benefit from this approach. First principles thinking is valuable anytime you're stuck, anytime conventional approaches aren't working, or anytime you need genuine innovation rather than incremental improvement. Here's a structured process for applying first principles thinking. Start by clearly stating the problem or goal. Be specific. Not "I want to be more productive," but "I want to complete my most important work tasks in less time without sacrificing quality." Next, break down your current approach into its underlying assumptions. What are you taking for granted? In the productivity example, you might be assuming that you need to respond to emails throughout the day, that meetings are necessary for coordination, that you need to be available to your team constantly, that certain tasks require specific tools or environments. Now challenge each assumption. Ask, is this actually true, or is it just how things are usually done? For each assumption, try to identify the fundamental constraint or truth underneath it. Maybe the fundamental truth isn't I need to respond to emails throughout the day, but rather I need to maintain effective communication with key stakeholders. These are not the same thing. The first is a method, the second is a goal. Once you've identified the fundamental truths and real constraints, you can reason upward to find new approaches. Maybe you batch email responses twice a day and set clear expectations with stakeholders. Maybe you replace some meetings with asynchronous updates. Maybe you create dedicated focus blocks where you're completely unavailable. The key insight is that first principles thinking forces clarity by stripping away accumulated conventions and getting to what actually matters. It's mentally demanding, which is why people don't do it for every problem, but for important challenges, it's extraordinarily valuable. Here's an exercise to build your first principles thinking muscle. Pick a routine activity in your life, something you do regularly without much thought. Maybe it's your morning routine, your workflow for a common task, or how you plan your week. Write down exactly how you currently do this activity, step by step. Now challenge every step. Why do you do it this way? What would happen if you didn't do this step at all? What fundamental goal is this step serving? Can that goal be achieved differently? What are you assuming that might not be true? This exercise often reveals that we continue doing things in specific ways long after the original reason for those approaches has disappeared. We follow processes that made sense in different circumstances but no longer serve us. First principles thinking cuts through this accumulated inefficiency and brings clarity to what actually matters. Now let's talk about cognitive shortcuts, because there's a common misconception that shortcuts always reduce thinking quality. People hear about biases and heuristics and conclude that they should avoid mental shortcuts entirely, that clear thinking requires careful analysis of everything. This is completely wrong and practically impossible. Your brain uses shortcuts constantly because it has to. You can't consciously analyze every decision, every perception, every thought. You'd be paralyzed. The question isn't whether to use shortcuts but which shortcuts to use. Some cognitive shortcuts lead to errors and confusion. Others lead to faster, clearer thinking without sacrificing accuracy. The key is understanding the difference. Bad shortcuts come from lazy thinking, from accepting surface-level patterns without validation, from substituting an easy question for a hard one. Good shortcuts come from deep understanding, from validated patterns, from deliberately constructed decision rules that have been tested and refined. Let me give you an example of a powerful clarity-enhancing shortcut, the reversible decision rule I mentioned in an earlier chapter. When you face a decision, instead of agonizing over the choice, you first ask, is this decision easily reversible? If yes, you make it quickly based on your best current information, knowing you can adjust if you're wrong. This shortcut dramatically reduces decision-making time and cognitive load without reducing decision quality, because reversible decisions don't require perfect information. Here's another valuable shortcut, the what would have to be true framework. When evaluating options or making predictions, instead of trying to analyze everything, you ask what would have to be true for this option to be the right choice, or what assumptions am I making that, if wrong, would invalidate this plan. This shortcut forces you to identify the critical assumptions underlying your thinking. You're not trying to prove you're right. You're trying to identify what you're betting on. This brings immediate clarity to complex decisions. Instead of getting lost in endless analysis, you focus on the few variables that actually determine the outcome. A third powerful shortcut is the outside view approach, developed by psychologist Daniel Kahneman. When making predictions or estimates, instead of thinking about the specific details of your situation, the inside view, you ask what typically happens in situations like this? You reference base rates and statistical patterns rather than getting caught up in what makes your situation feel unique. For example, if you're estimating how long a project will take, the inside view is planning based on the specific tasks involved. The outside view is asking how long have similar projects taken in the past? Research consistently shows that the outside view produces more accurate estimates, yet most people rely on the inside view because it feels more relevant to their specific situation. These shortcuts work because they're based on deep principles of how uncertainty, decision-making, and prediction actually work. They're not random rules of thumb. They're distilled wisdom from decades of research on judgment and choice. Using them doesn't make you a lazy thinker. It makes you an efficient one. Here's how to develop your own library of effective cognitive shortcuts. Pay attention to decisions and judgments you make repeatedly. Look for patterns in which approaches work and which don't. When you make a decision that turns out well, ask yourself what mental process led to that good outcome. When you make a mistake, analyze what shortcut or assumption led you astray. Over time, you'll build a personalized set of decision rules and thinking shortcuts that are calibrated to your specific context. Maybe you discover that your first instinct about people is usually accurate, so you develop a shortcut of trusting initial impressions for hiring decisions. Or maybe you find that your first instinct is often wrong, so you develop a shortcut of deliberately seeking out information that contradicts your initial reaction. The point is that effective shortcuts are earned through experience and reflection, not blindly adopted. They should enhance your clarity, not replace genuine thinking. Now we need to address a critical challenge: how do you maintain clarity when you're thinking quickly under pressure? How do you avoid the rushed thinking mistakes that plague most people when they try to operate at high speed? The first principle is this: rushed thinking isn't the same as fast thinking. Rushed thinking is what happens when you're moving quickly without proper preparation, without clear frameworks, without activated mental systems. It's like trying to sprint before warming up. You're likely to stumble or pull a mental muscle. Fast thinking, the kind we're developing throughout this book, is what happens when you've prepared properly, when you have strong mental models and pattern recognition, when your cognitive systems are warmed up and operating efficiently. You can move quickly because you've built the infrastructure for speed. That said, even with proper preparation, high-pressure situations can compromise your thinking. Stress hormones affect your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for complex reasoning and self-control. Time pressure can cause you to skip important steps in your analysis. The fear of making a wrong choice can lead to decision paralysis or to accepting the first plausible option you encounter. Here are specific techniques to maintain clarity under pressure. First, have a pre-pressure routine. Before entering a high-stakes situation where you'll need to think quickly, spend 5 minutes activating your cognitive systems. Review your key mental models. Remind yourself of your decision-making frameworks. Do a quick mental warm-up exercise. This preparation dramatically improves your performance under pressure. Second, use the pause and breathe technique. When you feel rushed, when you notice your thinking becoming frantic or scattered, pause for literally 3 seconds and take one deep breath. This brief interruption allows your prefrontal cortex to regain some control from your amygdala, which is screaming about urgency and threat. 3 seconds won't make you miss important opportunities, but it can prevent catastrophic mistakes. Third, have a clarity checklist for high-pressure decisions. Before finalizing any important choice made under time pressure, run through a brief mental checklist. What am I assuming? What's the worst-case scenario if I'm wrong? Am I solving the right problem? Is there an obvious alternative I'm not considering? This takes maybe 30 seconds but catches a huge percentage of rushed thinking errors. Fourth, practice thinking under artificial pressure. Set timers for your practice exercises. Give yourself deliberately insufficient time to complete tasks. Make decisions faster than feels comfortable during low-stakes situations. This trains your brain to maintain clarity even when rushed, the same way athletes practice under game-like conditions to prepare for actual competition. Fifth, develop what I call clarity anchors, specific phrases or questions you use to refocus your thinking when it starts to drift or become confused. Mine include: what's the actual question I'm trying to answer? What would I advise someone else in this situation? What matters most here? Find phrases that work for you and practice using them until they become automatic. Here's a real-world example of these principles in action. A surgeon I know faces life or death decisions constantly, often with incomplete information and massive time pressure. She maintains extraordinary clarity through a combination of these techniques. Before surgery, she does a mental warm-up, reviewing the specific anatomy and potential complications for that case. During unexpected situations in the operating room, she has a practiced pause response, a 1-second reset where she takes a breath and ensures she's addressing the actual problem, not just reacting to surface symptoms. She's also built an extensive library of chunks and patterns from thousands of surgeries. She can instantly recognize specific situations and deploy the appropriate response without conscious deliberation. And she has clarity anchors. Specific questions she asks herself when situations become chaotic. What's trying to kill my patient right now? What's my next most important action? These anchors cut through the noise and restore focus to what actually matters. You can build the same capabilities in your domain. The specific techniques might differ, but the principles are universal. Prepare before pressure. Use brief resets when needed. Build pattern recognition through experience. Develop personal clarity anchors. Practice under artificial pressure to build confidence and capability. Let me give you a comprehensive exercise that integrates everything we've covered in this chapter. Pick a complex problem you're currently facing, ideally something that matters to your work or life but isn't so urgent that you can't take time to think it through properly. First, apply chunking. What are the major components or patterns in this problem? Can you organize the complexity into a smaller number of meaningful categories? Create labels for each chunk and write down what each one contains. Second, apply first principles thinking. What are you assuming about this problem? What has to be true regardless of how you approach it? What fundamental constraints and variables actually determine the outcome? Strip away conventional wisdom and get to the core truths. Third, identify which cognitive shortcuts apply. Is this a reversible decision? What would have to be true for different approaches to work? What does the outside view suggest about likely outcomes? Don't analyze endlessly, use effective shortcuts to focus on what matters. Fourth, imagine you had to make this decision under significant time pressure. What would your clarity checklist include? What anchoring questions would keep you focused on what's important? Practice making the decision quickly using these tools, then compare it to your more deliberate analysis. What you'll find is that the quick decision, when made with proper tools and frameworks, is often just as good or better than the slow one. This is because clear thinking tools allow you to cut through irrelevant complexity and focus on the variables that actually matter. You're not sacrificing quality for speed. You're achieving both simultaneously through better technique. This is the fundamental insight of this chapter. Clarity and speed aren't opposing forces. They're complementary. The clearer you're thinking, the faster you can move, because you're not wasting time on confusion, irrelevant details, or analysis paralysis. And the better your tools for fast thinking, the more clarity you maintain, because you're using proven frameworks rather than improvising under pressure. Most people assume they need to slow down to think clearly. This is only true if you lack the proper mental tools. With chunking, you can handle greater complexity. With first principles thinking, you can achieve deeper understanding. With effective shortcuts, you can make better decisions faster. With pressure management techniques, you can maintain performance when it matters most. Build these capabilities deliberately, and you'll develop what looks like a superpower to others: the ability to quickly grasp complex situations, identify what matters, and make sound decisions even under pressure. This isn't magic or natural talent. It's systematic development of specific cognitive tools. The question, as always, is whether you'll do the work. Reading about these tools feels interesting. Actually implementing them, practicing them, refining them until they become automatic, that's where the real benefit comes from. Most people will read this chapter, think the ideas are valuable, and then continue thinking the way they always have. Don't be most people. Pick one tool from this chapter and commit to practicing it every day for a week. Maybe it's building a chunking system for your field. Maybe it's applying first principles thinking to a stubborn problem. Maybe it's developing and testing cognitive shortcuts. Maybe it's practicing clarity under artificial pressure. Start small, but start. Because every tool you master, every framework you internalize, every shortcut you validate, compounds over time. 6 months from now, you could be thinking with a level of clarity and speed that seems impossible from where you stand today. But only if you begin building that capability right now. Your mind is capable of extraordinary precision and speed simultaneously. These aren't opposing qualities you need to balance. They're complementary capabilities you can develop together through the right tools and practice. This chapter has given you those tools. The rest is up to you. Chapter 4: Strengthening Memory and Focus. Your brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information every second, yet your conscious mind can only handle around 40 to 50 bits at a time. This staggering discrepancy reveals something crucial about human cognition. The quality of your thinking depends not on how much information you can absorb, but on how effectively you can filter, focus, and retrieve what matters. In this chapter, we'll explore the mechanisms that transform scattered attention into laser focus, weak memory into reliable retrieval, and sluggish thinking into rapid cognitive processing. Think of your mind as a workshop. Right now, that workshop might be cluttered with half-finished projects, tools scattered everywhere, outdated materials piled in corners. Every time you need to build something, you waste precious minutes searching for the right instrument, clearing space, remembering where you left off. This is the reality for most people's cognitive processes. But imagine instead a workshop where every tool has its place, where your workspace is clear, where you can reach for exactly what you need without thinking. This is what happens when you strengthen your working memory and sharpen your focus. The speed of your thinking accelerates naturally because you've eliminated the friction that slows everyone else down. Let's start with working memory, the cognitive system that holds and manipulates information in your conscious awareness. When you read a phone number and hold it in mind long enough to dial it, that's working memory. When you follow a complex conversation while simultaneously considering your response, that's working memory. When you analyze multiple factors before making a decision, you're relying entirely on your working memory capacity. Research by Nelson Cowan and others has shown that most adults can hold approximately 4 chunks of information in working memory at once, though this varies considerably between individuals. The difference between someone who seems brilliantly quick-minded and someone who appears slow often comes down to working memory capacity and efficiency. Here's what makes this exciting. Working memory is trainable. It's not a fixed trait you're born with and stuck with forever. Studies using dual end-back tasks, a specific type of working memory training, have demonstrated improvements not just in the task itself but in fluid intelligence more broadly. Participants who trained consistently showed enhanced performance on completely unrelated cognitive tasks. They became faster thinkers across the board. The brain's plasticity allows it to rewire itself in response to demanding mental exercise, much like muscles grow in response to physical resistance training. So how do you actually train working memory? One of the most effective approaches is progressive overload, the same principle bodybuilders use. You start with challenges slightly beyond your current comfortable capacity, and you gradually increase the difficulty as you improve. Let me give you a practical exercise you can start today. Take any sequence of numbers, say 5 digits, 7-3-9-2-6. Look at them for 3 seconds, then close your eyes and repeat them backwards, 6-2-9-3-7. This simple reversal task forces your working memory to not just store information but actively manipulate it. When 5 digits becomes easy, move to 6, then 7. The challenge is what drives the adaptation. But here's where most people go wrong with working memory training. They practice in isolation, treating it like a party trick rather than a practical skill. The real power comes when you integrate working memory exercises into your daily life. When someone gives you directions, resist the urge to immediately write them down or enter them into your phone. Instead, hold the entire sequence in mind, visualize the route, and only record it after you've mentally rehearsed the journey. When you're reading a complex article, periodically pause and reconstruct the argument from memory before continuing. These real-world applications create functional improvements that transfer directly to your thinking speed. Another powerful working memory technique involves what cognitive scientists call chunking. Your brain doesn't store information as individual bits, it groups related items into meaningful clusters. A chess grandmaster doesn't remember the position of 32 individual pieces, they recognize familiar patterns and store those patterns as single chunks. This is why a master can glance at a board mid-game and instantly recall the entire position, while a beginner struggles to remember even a few piece locations. You can apply this same principle to any domain. When learning a new language, don't memorize individual words, learn phrases in common combinations. When studying a new subject, don't focus on isolated facts, build conceptual frameworks that link information together. The more efficiently you chunk, the more your working memory can hold, and the faster you can process complex information. Now let's turn to attention, the spotlight that determines what enters your working memory in the first place. Your attention is under constant assault. Research by Gloria Mark at the University of California found that the average knowledge worker is interrupted or switches tasks every 3 minutes. After each interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully return to the original task. Think about that. If you're interrupted just 4 times in an hour, you never actually achieve deep focus. You spend your entire day in a state of partial attention, and this has devastating effects on your cognitive speed. When your attention is fragmented, your brain must constantly reload context, re-establish priorities, and rebuild the mental models it needs for effective thinking. It's like trying to run a race where you have to stop and tie your shoes every 100 meters. Attention training begins with understanding that focus is not a passive state, it's an active skill you develop through practice. One of the most researched methods is focused attention meditation, where you sustain attention on a single object, typically the breath, and gently return your focus each time your mind wanders. Neuroscience research using fMRI scans has shown that regular meditators develop increased gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive control and sustained attention. Even more impressive, studies have found measurable improvements in attention span after just 8 weeks of daily practice. But you don't need to become a meditation expert to strengthen your attention. Start with what I call attention anchoring. Choose one routine task you do every day, something simple like making coffee or washing dishes. For the entire duration of that task, commit to complete presence. Notice every sensation, every movement, every sound. When your mind wanders to your schedule or your worries or what you'll do later, simply return to the immediate experience. This practice might seem trivial, but it's training the exact neural circuits you need for sustained focus. You're building the mental muscle that allows you to direct and maintain attention at will. The next level involves progressive attention challenges. Set a timer for 5 minutes and read a moderately difficult text with complete focus. No phone, no music, no interruptions. Every time you notice your attention drifting, make a small mark on a piece of paper and return to the text. Count your marks at the end. The next day, try to reduce that number. Within 2 weeks of consistent practice, most people can cut their attention lapses by more than half. This isn't just about reading, you're developing a generalized capacity for sustained cognitive effort. That capacity translates directly into faster thinking because you can maintain complex thought processes without constantly losing your train of thought. Here's a counterintuitive truth about attention: breaks make you faster. The brain's attentional resources are finite and depletable. Try to focus intensely for 4 straight hours and you'll find your thinking becoming progressively slower and more error-prone. But work in focused sprints with genuine breaks, and you can maintain peak cognitive speed all day. Research on ultradian rhythms, the natural 90-minute cycles your brain moves through, suggests that optimal cognitive performance comes from working in focused blocks of 60 to 90 minutes followed by complete breaks of 10 to 15 minutes. During those breaks, don't check email or scroll social media, take a walk, stare out a window, let your mind genuinely rest. This rhythm allows your brain to consolidate information and restore attentional resources. Now we need to address the elephant in the room: digital distraction. Your smartphone is engineered to fracture your attention. Every notification, every red badge, every infinite scroll feed is designed by teams of behavioral psychologists to hijack your focus. You cannot out-willpower this system. Trying to maintain focus while your phone sits on your desk buzzing with notifications is like trying to diet while sitting in a candy store. The solution isn't discipline, it's environmental design. During focused work periods, your phone should be in another room, not just face down on your desk. Turn off all non-essential notifications permanently. Use website blockers during work hours. These aren't crutches for weak-willed people. They're intelligent systems that protect your most valuable cognitive resource. But mental clutter isn't just about external distractions. The most insidious form of cognitive clutter is internal: the unfinished tasks, unmade decisions, and unprocessed information that occupies space in your working memory even when you're trying to focus on something else. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency for incomplete tasks to occupy mental space and create background anxiety. Every time you tell yourself, "I need to remember to do that later," you're creating a small cognitive burden. Individually, these burdens are tiny, but collectively they create a constant drag on your mental processing speed. The solution is a systematic approach to capturing and processing commitments. David Allen's Getting Things Done methodology offers a powerful framework. Anything that requires action gets immediately captured in a trusted external system, not left floating in your head. When a task pops into your mind, you have three options: do it immediately if it takes less than 2 minutes, schedule it for later with a specific time, or delegate it to someone else. What you never do is leave it in mental limbo. This might sound like productivity advice rather than cognitive enhancement, but the two are inseparable. Every commitment you remove from your working memory frees up cognitive bandwidth for actual thinking. People who implement comprehensive capture systems often report feeling like they've suddenly become smarter, but they haven't gained intelligence, they've simply stopped wasting it on mental juggling. Let's talk about a specific exercise that combines working memory, attention, and clutter elimination: the evening brain dump. Before bed, take 15 minutes to write down everything on your mind. Every worry, every task, every random thought. Don't organize it or judge it. Just get it out of your head and onto paper. Then review the list and process each item: what needs to be scheduled, what can be eliminated, what requires further thought. This practice serves multiple functions. First, it prevents your unconscious mind from processing this information during sleep, which improves sleep quality and next-day cognitive performance. Second, it trains your ability to rapidly access and articulate the contents of your working memory. Third, it creates a clear boundary between day and night, allowing genuine mental recovery. After a few weeks of this practice, most people notice they can fall asleep faster and wake up with clearer, faster thinking. Now let's examine how disciplined focus creates faster thought patterns. There's a common misconception that fast thinkers are somehow processing information more quickly at a neural level, like a computer with a faster processor. But brain imaging research tells a different story. The difference between fast and slow thinkers isn't raw processing speed, it's efficiency of neural pathways. When you first learn a skill, your brain activates widely distributed networks, recruiting many regions to accomplish the task. As you practice and improve, the activation pattern becomes more focused and efficient. Expert performance is characterized by less brain activity, not more. The neural pathways have been optimized through repetition. This principle applies directly to thinking itself. When you consistently practice focused attention on complex problems, your brain develops more efficient pathways for that type of cognitive work. The first time you analyze a business problem, your thinking might be slow and effortful, activating many neural regions as you consciously work through each step. But after analyzing hundreds of similar problems with sustained focus, the process becomes rapid and intuitive. You're not necessarily smarter, you've just built efficient neural highways for that particular type of thinking. This is why expertise in one domain often transfers to others. The disciplined focus you develop solving math problems enhances your ability to focus on any complex cognitive task. Here's a practical application of this principle: deliberate difficulty. When you're learning or problem solving, resist the temptation to immediately look up answers or seek help. Spend time struggling with the problem first. Research by psychologists like Robert Bjork shows that this productive struggle, though frustrating in the moment, creates much stronger learning and faster long-term retrieval. When you force your brain to search for solutions, you're strengthening the very neural pathways that enable fast thinking. Students who spend 5 minutes trying to solve a problem before seeing the solution learn faster and retain more than students who immediately study worked examples. Let's discuss a specific daily practice that integrates everything we've covered: the focused thinking hour. Every day, schedule 1 hour for your most cognitively demanding work. During this hour, eliminate all distractions, close all irrelevant programs and apps, and work on a single task that requires genuine mental effort. This might be writing, strategic planning, complex problem solving, or deep learning. The key is singular focus on something that challenges your working memory and attention. Start with 30 minutes if an hour seems impossible. The duration matters less than the consistency and the quality of focus. Over time, this daily practice rewires your brain's default patterns. You'll find that the focused state becomes easier to access, that your working memory capacity expands, that your thinking naturally accelerates. But what about memory beyond working memory? Your long-term memory, the vast repository of everything you know and have experienced, plays a crucial role in thinking speed. When you're solving a problem or making a decision, you're constantly pulling relevant information from long-term memory into working memory. The faster and more reliably you can do this, the faster you can think. This is why someone with deep expertise in a field can think circles around a novice, even if the novice has a higher IQ. The expert has a rich, well-organized database of knowledge to draw from, and they've developed efficient retrieval pathways through years of practice. You can dramatically improve your long-term memory encoding and retrieval through strategic review. The spacing effect, one of the most robust findings in cognitive psychology, shows that information reviewed at increasing intervals is retained far better than information crammed in a single session. Instead of reading something once and hoping it sticks, review it after 1 day, then 3 days, then 1 week, then 2 weeks. This spaced repetition forces your brain to actively reconstruct the information each time, strengthening the memory trace. Modern apps like Anki automate this process, but you can implement it manually with any information you want to retain. Here's where it gets interesting: the act of retrieval itself is a more powerful learning tool than additional study. Testing yourself on material, even before you feel ready, creates stronger memories than simply reviewing. This is called the testing effect. When you force your brain to recall information, you're not just checking what you know, you're actively strengthening the neural pathways that allow rapid access to that information. This is why active recall techniques, where you close the book and try to write everything you remember, create faster and more durable learning than passive review. Let me share a story that illustrates the compound effects of these practices. A few years ago, I worked with a software engineer who complained that his thinking had become sluggish. He struggled to hold complex systems in mind and found decision-making increasingly draining. We implemented a simple protocol: 20 minutes of daily working memory exercises using a number sequencing app, 2 focused work blocks of 90 minutes each with no phone or interruptions, a comprehensive task management system to eliminate mental clutter, and weekly reviews of key technical concepts using spaced repetition. Within 6 weeks, he reported feeling sharper than he had in years. His code reviews became faster and more insightful. He could design system architectures in his head that previously required extensive note-taking. His teammates started asking what had changed. Nothing magical had occurred, he had simply removed the friction from his cognitive processes and trained the underlying capacities. The truth is, most people are operating at a fraction of their cognitive potential, not because they lack intelligence but because they've never trained the fundamental skills of focus and memory. They're trying to run a race with shoes full of sand. Every distraction, every piece of unprocessed mental clutter, every inefficient memory pathway is a grain of sand slowing them down. Remove that sand, train the underlying capacities, and suddenly you're not just thinking faster, you're thinking better. You're making sharper decisions because you can hold more relevant factors in mind simultaneously. You're learning more rapidly because your memory encoding and retrieval systems are optimized. You're less prone to cognitive fatigue because you've developed efficient neural pathways that require less energy. One final practice that ties everything together: the weekly cognitive review. Every Sunday evening, spend 30 minutes reflecting on your cognitive performance from the past week. When did you feel sharp and focused? What enabled that state? When did you feel foggy or scattered? What caused it? Are you noticing improvements in your working memory capacity? Is your attention span increasing? This metacognitive practice, thinking about your thinking, accelerates your development because it makes improvement conscious and deliberate rather than random and accidental. The path to faster thinking isn't about finding some cognitive hack or taking a smart drug. It's about systematically strengthening the fundamental capacities that underlie all thought. Working memory, sustained attention, and efficient information retrieval. It's about eliminating the mental clutter that gums up your cognitive machinery. It's about creating environmental conditions that protect rather than fragment your focus. And most importantly, it's about consistent daily practice of cognitively demanding tasks with full attention. Do this for 3 months and you won't recognize your own thinking. The speed, the clarity, the effortless flow of ideas will feel like you've unlocked a new level of cognitive ability. But you haven't gained anything new, you've simply removed everything that was holding you back and trained what was always there. Your brain is waiting for you to use it properly. Start today. Chapter 5: Becoming a High-Level Thinker. There's a moment that occurs in the development of every exceptional thinker, though most people never experience it. It's the moment when thinking itself becomes conscious and deliberate rather than automatic and reactive. You stop simply having thoughts and start choosing them. You stop reacting to ideas and start evaluating them. You transition from being a passive receiver of your own mental processes to becoming the architect of your cognitive life. This chapter is about engineering that transition, about systematically upgrading your thinking from competent to exceptional, from reactive to strategic, from limited to continuously expanding. Let's start with a fundamental truth that most people never fully grasp: your thoughts are habits. Just as you have physical habits of posture and movement, you have cognitive habits of attention and interpretation. When something unexpected happens, you have a habitual way of thinking about it. When you encounter a problem, you have a habitual approach to solving it. When you learn new information, you have a habitual method of processing it. These habits were formed largely by accident, shaped by your environment, your early education, and random experiences. They weren't designed for excellence, they simply emerged. And here's the crucial insight: because they're habits, they can be changed. You can deliberately install new patterns of thinking that serve you better. Consider how you currently approach problems. Most people engage in what psychologists call System 1 thinking, the fast, automatic, intuitive mode that operates below conscious awareness. You see a situation, and your brain immediately generates a response based on pattern matching in past experience. This is efficient for routine situations, but it's catastrophically limited for complex or novel problems. High-level thinkers have trained themselves to recognize when System 1 is insufficient and deliberately engage System 2, the slow, effortful, analytical mode. They've built a habit of pausing before responding, of asking clarifying questions, of examining their initial reactions rather than blindly trusting them. Here's a specific daily practice that upgrades this habit: the 3-question pause. Whenever you encounter a problem or decision, before taking action or forming a conclusion, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what am I assuming? This surfaces the hidden premises your brain is using to interpret the situation. Second, what else could this mean? This forces consideration of alternative interpretations. Third, what would someone smarter than me think about this? This creates psychological distance and activates more sophisticated reasoning. These 3 questions take perhaps 30 seconds, but they transform reactive thinking into deliberate analysis. Do this consistently for a month, and you'll find the pause becomes automatic. You'll have installed a new cognitive habit that elevates every subsequent thought. But upgrading individual thinking moments isn't enough. You need to redesign your entire cognitive environment, the daily context in which your thinking occurs. Your environment is constantly shaping your thoughts, usually in ways you don't notice. The content you consume, the conversations you have, the physical spaces you occupy, all of these create default patterns of thinking. Most people allow their environment to be shaped by convenience and habit rather than intentional design. They scroll whatever social media serves them, engage in whatever conversations happen to occur, work in whatever space is available. This environmental randomness produces random thinking quality. High-level thinkers curate their inputs with the same care that athletes curate their nutrition. They recognize that every piece of information they consume either upgrades or degrades their thinking. Consider reading habits. The average person reads primarily for entertainment or immediate practical utility. They consume news, novels, self-help books offering quick fixes. None of this is wrong, but it doesn't systematically upgrade thinking capacity. High-level thinkers deliberately include dense, challenging material in their reading diet. They read primary sources rather than summaries, academic papers rather than pop science, classic texts that have survived centuries rather than only contemporary bestsellers. This isn't intellectual snobbery. It's strategic exposure to sophisticated thinking patterns that gradually become integrated into your own cognitive toolkit. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose you want to improve your strategic thinking ability. You could read 10 business books offering frameworks and case studies, and you'd gain some useful knowledge. Or you could spend that same time working through a single dense text like Sun Tzu's Art of War or Karl von Clausewitz's On War, really grappling with the concepts, writing out your interpretations, applying the principles to modern situations. The second approach is harder, slower, and less immediately satisfying. But it fundamentally rewires how you think about strategy because you're engaging with minds that operated at the highest level. You're not just learning about strategy. You're experiencing sophisticated strategic thinking and allowing it to reshape your own patterns. This principle extends beyond reading. Your conversations are either upgrading or maintaining your current thinking level. If every discussion you have stays comfortably within your existing knowledge and perspective, you're not growing. High-level thinkers actively seek out conversations with people who think differently, who know things they don't, who challenge their assumptions. They ask genuine questions rather than waiting to speak. They steelman opposing arguments rather than strawmanning them. They admit ignorance rather than bluffing. These conversational habits feel uncomfortable at first because they require ego subordination, but they create exponential learning velocity. Now let's talk about the most powerful learning technology ever discovered, spaced repetition. I mentioned this briefly in the previous chapter, but it deserves deeper exploration because it's the difference between learning something and truly knowing it, between slow recognition and instant recall, between information you need to look up and knowledge that's instantly available in your working memory. The basic principle is simple: you remember best when you review information at increasing intervals, right at the edge of forgetting. Review too soon and you don't strengthen the memory. Review too late and you've forgotten it completely, requiring full relearning. The sweet spot is reviewing just before the memory would fade. Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered this in the 1880s through painstaking self-experimentation, but most people still learn as if his research never happened. They cram information in intense sessions, achieve temporary familiarity, then wonder why everything evaporates within weeks. The forgetting curve is brutal. You lose approximately 50% of newly learned information within 1 hour, and approximately 90% within 1 month, unless you actively combat this decay through strategic review. Spaced repetition is how you combat it. After learning something, review it after 1 day. That review takes the forgetting curve and resets it at a higher baseline. Then review after 3 days, then 1 week, then 2 weeks, then 1 month. Each review takes progressively less time while creating progressively more durable memory. But here's what most spaced repetition guides miss: the format of your review matters enormously. Passive review, where you simply reread notes or rewatch a lecture, creates weak memories that feel strong in the moment but don't last. Active recall, where you force yourself to generate the information from memory before checking your notes, creates robust memories that withstand the test of time. This is why testing yourself is more powerful than studying. The act of retrieval itself strengthens the neural pathways you're trying to build. Let me show you how to implement this practically. Choose one domain where you want to develop genuine expertise, something you're learning right now or want to learn. As you encounter key concepts, create questions that force active recall. Not simple recognition questions like what is spaced repetition, but application questions like how would you design a learning system for medical students using spaced repetition principles? Write these questions on flashcards, physical or digital. Every day, review your due cards, attempting to answer from memory before flipping to check. When you get a card right, increase its interval. When you get it wrong, reset it to review soon. This system takes perhaps 15 minutes daily but creates knowledge that compounds over years rather than evaporating over weeks. The mathematician John von Neumann, one of history's fastest and most powerful thinkers, was known for his ability to instantly recall vast amounts of information. People attributed this to supernatural genius, but his biographers noted something interesting. He constantly quizzed himself on everything he'd learned, creating a personal knowledge system that was always accessible. He didn't just learn things once, he integrated them into permanent memory through systematic review. You can do the same. The difference between someone who seems brilliant and someone who seems average often isn't raw intelligence, it's whether knowledge is instantly accessible or buried under the fog of forgetting. Now we need to discuss reflection, the most underrated cognitive practice in modern life. Reflection is the process of deliberately examining your experiences, extracting lessons, and integrating them into your worldview. Without reflection, you can live 80 years and have 1 year of experience 80 times. With systematic reflection, every experience becomes a source of wisdom. The difference is staggering. I've met 25-year-olds with more practical wisdom than 60-year-olds because they've cultivated a habit of learning from everything that happens to them. Here's why reflection accelerates wisdom. Experience alone doesn't teach you anything. What teaches you is processing the experience, comparing it to your predictions, updating your models of how the world works. When something unexpected happens, most people note it briefly and move on. They experience the surprise but don't extract the lesson. High-level thinkers do something different. They stop and ask, why did this surprise me? What was my implicit prediction? What does reality know that I didn't? This process of identifying and correcting prediction errors is how you build increasingly accurate mental models of the world, and those models are what allow fast, effective thinking in complex situations. Implement a daily reflection practice, just 15 minutes before bed. Use a simple framework. What happened today that was significant? What did I learn? What would I do differently? What principle or insight emerged? Write brief answers, not elaborate journal entries. The act of writing forces clarity that internal rumination never achieves. After a month of daily reflection, review all your entries and look for patterns. You'll start noticing recurring themes, repeated mistakes, emerging insights. These meta-patterns are where wisdom lives. But daily reflection is just the foundation. Add weekly and monthly reviews. Every Sunday, spend 30 minutes reviewing your week. What worked? What didn't? What's one thing you'll change next week? Every month, spend an hour examining your progress on larger goals and the quality of your thinking. Are you noticing improvements in decision speed? In learning retention? In problem-solving ability? This metacognitive awareness, this watching yourself think and deliberately adjusting your approach, is what separates lifelong learners from people who plateau. Let me tell you about a trader I worked with who transformed his results through systematic reflection. He was talented but inconsistent, making brilliant trades some days and impulsive mistakes others. We implemented a simple protocol. After every trading day, he spent 10 minutes writing answers to 4 questions. What were my best decisions today and why? What were my worst decisions and why? What emotional states led to each? What will I do differently tomorrow? Within 3 months, his consistency improved dramatically because he was extracting lessons from every single day rather than just living through them. His experience was compounding instead of repeating. This brings us to the core of becoming a high-level thinker, building a lifelong mindset of continuous cognitive upgrade. Most people have a fixed relationship with their thinking abilities. They believe they're either smart or not, fast learners or slow, good with numbers or bad at them. These fixed mindsets are self-fulfilling prophecies. When you believe your abilities are static, you avoid challenges that might expose limitations. You interpret difficulty as evidence of inadequacy rather than opportunity for growth. You plateau and stay there. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset revealed that people who view abilities as developable through effort consistently outperform people with fixed mindsets, even when the fixed mindset people have higher initial ability. The growth mindset isn't just optimistic thinking, it changes how you respond to every cognitive challenge. When you struggle with a concept, you think I haven't mastered this yet rather than I'm not smart enough for this. That subtle shift in interpretation completely changes your behavior. You persist instead of giving up. You seek harder challenges instead of playing it safe. You view feedback as information rather than judgment. Cultivating a growth mindset about your thinking specifically requires deliberate practice. Start noticing your internal dialogue when you encounter cognitive difficulty. When you think I'm bad at this, rephrase it, I haven't developed this skill yet. When you think this is too hard, rephrase it, this will require more effort than I initially expected. When you think I'm not smart enough, rephrase it, I need to approach this differently or get more information. These aren't just feel-good affirmations, they're accurate descriptions of reality. Cognitive abilities are trainable. What you practice, you improve. But a growth mindset needs to be coupled with what I call strategic skill stacking. You can't become excellent at everything, and trying to do so guarantees mediocrity across the board. High-level thinkers identify a core set of meta-skills that enhance everything else they do, and they develop those relentlessly. These meta-skills include things like reading comprehension, written communication, quantitative reasoning, systems thinking, and emotional regulation. Each of these skills amplifies your ability to develop domain-specific knowledge. Someone with excellent reading comprehension learns 10 times faster from books than someone who reads slowly and forgets immediately. Someone with strong systems thinking can transfer insights across completely different fields. Choose 3 meta-skills you want to develop over the next year. For each one, identify the best resources, create a practice schedule, and implement spaced repetition for key concepts. This focused approach is far more effective than scattered learning across dozens of topics. After a year of deliberate practice on 3 core skills, you'll find that everything else you attempt becomes easier because you've upgraded your fundamental cognitive toolkit. Let's discuss deliberate practice more specifically, because most people confuse practice with deliberate practice, and the difference determines whether you improve or just repeat the same level of performance. Playing golf every weekend for 20 years isn't deliberate practice, it's recreation. You might maintain a consistent handicap, but you won't dramatically improve. Deliberate practice requires pushing beyond your current ability, getting immediate feedback, and focusing intensely on weaknesses. A golfer engaging in deliberate practice would spend hours on their worst shots, not playing rounds. They'd work with a coach who provides constant correction. They'd track specific metrics and adjust technique based on data. Apply this same rigor to thinking. Identify your cognitive weaknesses through honest self-assessment. Maybe you avoid quantitative reasoning, preferring qualitative analysis. Maybe you struggle with long-term thinking, defaulting to short-term optimization. Maybe you're weak at considering second-order consequences. Once you've identified a weakness, design exercises that specifically target it. If you avoid math, spend 30 minutes daily working through progressively harder mathematical problems. If you struggle with long-term thinking, practice scenario planning for various situations, forcing yourself to project 5, 10, 20 years into the future. If you miss second-order effects, make it a habit to ask "and then what happens?" 3 times for every decision or prediction. The discomfort you feel during deliberate practice is the feeling of cognitive growth. Your brain is like any other biological system, it adapts in response to demands placed on it. When you repeatedly push yourself to think in ways that are currently difficult, your brain gradually rewires to make those patterns easier. After 6 months of deliberate practice on quantitative reasoning, problems that once seemed impossible will feel straightforward. You haven't become inherently smarter, you've built neural pathways optimized for that type of thinking. Now let's talk about a practice that integrates everything we've discussed: teaching. When you teach something, you reveal the gaps in your own understanding with brutal clarity. Concepts you thought you knew dissolve into vagueness when you try to explain them clearly. This exposure is invaluable because it shows you exactly where to focus your learning. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist known for his exceptional clarity of thought, used what's now called the Feynman technique. Try to explain a concept in simple language, as if teaching a child. Where you struggle to explain, you don't truly understand. Go back to the source material, clarify your thinking, and try again. Repeat until you can explain it simply and clearly. You don't need a formal teaching role to use this technique. Start a blog where you explain concepts you're learning. Create YouTube videos teaching skills you're developing. Join online communities and answer questions in your area of expertise. Each act of teaching forces you to organize your knowledge, identify gaps, and articulate connections between ideas. This process dramatically accelerates learning while building communication skills that enhance every other area of life. Here's a specific challenge that will accelerate your development: the 30-day documentation project. Choose one skill or domain you want to master. For 30 consecutive days, learn something new about it and create content teaching what you learned. This could be written posts, videos, audio recordings, whatever format suits you. The daily commitment forces consistency. The public nature creates accountability. The teaching requirement ensures deep processing. After 30 days, you'll have advanced further in that domain than most people advance in years because you've combined learning with active recall, spaced repetition, and articulation. Let me share a personal example. Years ago, I wanted to deeply understand decision-making under uncertainty. I committed to writing one article per week for a year explaining different decision-making frameworks, cognitive biases, probabilistic thinking tools. Each article required reading source material, synthesizing concepts, creating examples, and explaining clearly. By the end of that year, I had 52 articles and a level of expertise that would have taken 5 years of casual reading to achieve. The forcing function of weekly teaching compressed the learning timeline dramatically. As you build these practices into your life, you'll notice something remarkable: thinking itself becomes enjoyable rather than effortful. Right now, hard thinking probably feels like work, something you do when necessary but avoid when possible. High-level thinkers experience thinking as play, as genuinely engaging activity they seek out. This shift happens because you've developed sufficient skill that you can successfully tackle interesting problems. Frustration comes from attempting things beyond your current ability without a clear path to improvement. Flow comes from working at the edge of your abilities with clear feedback. As your thinking skills improve, more problems fall into that sweet spot where they're challenging but achievable, and thinking transforms from occasional necessity to daily pleasure. Building a lifelong fast and smart mindset isn't about reaching some final destination where you've arrived as a thinker. It's about establishing systems and habits that ensure you're continuously improving, that you're thinking better this year than last year, that you're more capable at 60 than you were at 30. The trajectory matters more than the current position. Someone with modest current abilities but a system for continuous improvement will eventually surpass someone with high initial abilities but no growth system. Your daily habits are the system. 20 minutes of spaced repetition review each morning. 15 minutes of reflection each evening. 1 focused reading session of challenging material. 1 teaching or writing session to articulate what you're learning. 3 instances of deliberate pause before important decisions. 1 conversation with someone who thinks differently than you. These habits take perhaps 90 minutes total in a day, but they compound over years into extraordinary thinking ability. The question isn't whether you have time for these practices. You already spend hours each day consuming content, scrolling feeds, engaging in reactive thinking. The question is whether you'll intentionally redirect that time and energy towards systematic cognitive development. The difference between average and exceptional thinking isn't talent, It's whether you treat thinking as something that happens to you or something you actively cultivate. You now have the frameworks, the practices, the understanding of how high-level thinking is built. What remains is the decision to implement them, to commit to becoming the thinker you're capable of becoming. That decision, and the daily actions that follow it, will determine the trajectory of your cognitive life for decades to come. Choose wisely, and choose now. The transformation I'm describing isn't theoretical. I've watched it happen in real time with hundreds of people who committed to these practices. There's a pattern to how the change unfolds, and understanding this pattern helps you navigate the inevitable difficulties that arise. The first 2 weeks feel artificially easy. You're motivated, the practices are novel, you see immediate small wins. Then you hit the messy middle, usually around week 3 or 4, where the habits aren't yet automatic but the novelty has worn off. This is where most people abandon the project. They interpret the increased difficulty as evidence that this isn't working or this isn't for me. But difficulty at this stage is actually proof that you're doing it right. You're in the awkward phase where old patterns are dissolving but new ones haven't solidified. Push through this phase with sheer discipline, not motivation, and around week 6 something shifts. The practices start feeling natural. You catch yourself applying the frameworks automatically. This is when real transformation begins. Let me talk about something most cognitive development guides ignore: the role of physical state in thinking quality. Your brain is a physical organ, and its performance is heavily dependent on the biological conditions you create. Sleep deprivation reduces your cognitive capacity to a level equivalent to legal intoxication. Chronic stress floods your system with cortisol, which literally shrinks the hippocampus and impairs memory formation. Poor nutrition deprives your brain of the raw materials it needs for neurotransmitter production. You can have the best thinking frameworks in the world, but if you're operating on 5 hours of sleep, high stress, and a diet of processed foods, your actual thinking performance will be mediocre. High-level thinkers treat their physical state as foundational infrastructure for cognitive performance. They prioritize sleep with the same rigor they apply to important meetings. They manage stress through regular practices like meditation, exercise, or time in nature. They eat in ways that stabilize blood sugar and provide sustained energy rather than spikes and crashes. These aren't separate concerns from thinking development, they're prerequisites for it. I've seen people struggle for months to improve their focus and learning, then experience dramatic improvements simply by fixing their sleep schedule. The cognitive practices I'm teaching you will work far better when implemented on a foundation of good physical health. Here's a specific protocol for optimizing your biological state for thinking. Establish a consistent sleep schedule where you get 7 to 9 hours nightly, not as an average but as a minimum. Your brain consolidates memories and clears metabolic waste during sleep. Shortchange this process and everything else suffers. Implement a morning routine that doesn't involve immediately flooding your system with information. Instead of checking your phone the moment you wake, spend the first 30 minutes in activities that prime quality thinking: light exercise, meditation, journaling, or reading something substantive. This sets your cognitive tone for the day. Throughout the day, take genuine breaks every 90 minutes. Your brain operates in ultradian rhythms, and working straight through these natural cycles degrades performance. A 15-minute walk or even just staring out a window gives your default mode network time to consolidate learning and make unexpected connections. Now let's address a critical skill that determines the ceiling of your cognitive development: the ability to maintain multiple perspectives simultaneously. Most people think from a single viewpoint, their own, and this creates a fundamental limitation. They encounter a problem and immediately interpret it through their existing framework, their biases, their knowledge, their preferences. This monoperspective thinking misses huge amounts of relevant information. High-level thinkers have trained themselves to mentally shift between different perspectives, seeing a situation through multiple lenses before forming conclusions. Consider a business problem: declining sales. A monoperspective thinker might immediately conclude we need better marketing because that's their background and where their attention naturally goes. A multi-perspective thinker deliberately examines the situation from different angles. From the customer's perspective, what's changed in their needs or alternatives? From the product perspective, has quality or relevance declined? From the market perspective, are there structural shifts we're missing? From the employee perspective, has something changed in how the team operates? From the competitor perspective, what are they doing differently? Each perspective reveals different facets of the truth, and the synthesis of multiple perspectives creates far more accurate understanding than any single viewpoint. You can train this ability systematically. When analyzing any situation, force yourself to write out at least 5 different interpretations from 5 different perspectives before forming your conclusion. A hiring decision, see it from the candidate's view, the team's view, the company's long-term view, the customer's view, the competitor's view. A personal relationship conflict, see it from the other person's emotional state, their past experiences, their current stressors, their goals, their fears. This practice feels cumbersome initially, but it develops into rapid mental flexibility where you automatically consider multiple angles. There's a related skill that amplifies this: the ability to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously without forcing premature resolution. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Most people experience psychological discomfort when confronted with contradictions and rush to resolve the tension by picking one side or dismissing the contradiction as invalid. This rush to certainty closes off learning. Reality is often genuinely paradoxical. Something can be both true and not true depending on context, timeframe, or level of analysis. High-level thinkers develop comfort with ambiguity and contradiction. They can think this approach has significant merits and this approach has significant flaws without immediately needing to categorize it as good or bad. They can hold "I should trust my intuition" and "I should question my intuition" as simultaneously valid principles that apply in different circumstances. This cognitive flexibility allows for more nuanced thinking and better decisions in complex situations where simple binary categorizations don't apply. Practice this through dialectical thinking exercises. Take any strong opinion you hold and force yourself to write the strongest possible case against it. Not a strawman argument, but the actual best reasoning someone intelligent and informed might use to reach the opposite conclusion. Then write the synthesis. How might both perspectives contain partial truths? What's the higher-level framework that accommodates both viewpoints? Doing this regularly for various topics trains your mind to escape binary thinking and operate in the more sophisticated space where most real-world truth actually exists. Let me introduce you to a concept that will dramatically upgrade your learning efficiency: the difference between depth-first and breadth-first learning, and when to use each approach. Most people learn in a disorganized middle ground, going somewhat deep on some topics and somewhat broad on others without strategic intention. This scattered approach is inefficient. Depth-first learning means picking one topic and diving extraordinarily deep before moving to the next topic. Breadth-first learning means sampling many topics at a surface level before choosing where to go deep. Both are valuable, but they serve different purposes and work best in different situations. Use breadth-first learning when exploring a new field where you don't yet know the terrain. Spend a month reading introductory material across the entire landscape of the domain. Don't worry about mastery. You're building a mental map of what exists, how topics relate, where the interesting questions live. This reconnaissance prevents you from going deep on areas that turn out to be dead ends or less relevant than they initially appeared. After this broad exploration, switch to depth-first learning on the most promising areas. Now you commit to genuine mastery, spending months or years developing real expertise in specific subdomains. The mistake most people make is staying in breadth-first mode forever, accumulating shallow knowledge across many topics but never developing the deep expertise that creates real capability. Or they go depth-first too early, investing years in mastering something before discovering it wasn't the right area to focus on. The strategic approach is breadth-first for reconnaissance, then depth-first for mastery, then periodically returning to breadth-first to update your map and identify new areas for deep work. Here's a practical implementation. When entering a new field, spend your first month reading survey articles, textbooks, and overview materials. Don't take detailed notes, you're just building familiarity. Keep a running list of topics that seem particularly interesting or important. At the end of the month, choose the top 3 topics from your list and commit to going deep on them over the next 6 months. Now you switch to intensive study, detailed notes, spaced repetition, practice problems, teaching others, the full depth first approach. After 6 months of deep work, take another breath first month to see what's new in the field and whether your focus areas are still optimal. This rhythm of exploration and exploitation ensures you're both well informed about the broader landscape and genuinely expert in key areas. We need to talk about a transformation that happens as you develop high-level thinking. Your relationship with failure completely changes. Right now, if you're like most people, failure feels bad. It's something to avoid, something that triggers shame or frustration, something that makes you question your abilities. This emotional response to failure is one of the biggest obstacles to rapid learning because it causes you to avoid the very situations where you'd learn most. High-level thinkers have rewired their emotional response to failure. They've trained themselves to feel curiosity and interest when things don't work, because they recognize failure as the fastest route to learning. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending failure doesn't hurt. It's about understanding the information value of failure. When something succeeds, you learn that your current approach works in this situation. Useful, but limited information. When something fails, you learn that your mental model was inaccurate, and you get data about how reality differs from your expectations. This is extraordinarily valuable information because it shows you exactly where to update your thinking. The person who fails frequently and extracts lessons rapidly accumulates accurate mental models much faster than the person who plays it safe and rarely encounters disconfirming evidence. Cultivate this relationship with failure through systematic experimentation. Deliberately try things where failure is likely, approaches you're uncertain about, ideas that might not work. When they fail, as many will, immediately shift into analysis mode. What did I predict would happen? What actually happened? What does this reveal about my model of how this domain works? What's one specific update I'll make to my thinking based on this data? Write these answers down. You're building a database of lessons learned through failure, and this database becomes one of your most valuable cognitive assets. I once mentored a software engineer who was stuck at a mediocre level despite years of experience. His problem wasn't lack of technical knowledge. It was that he avoided any project where he might fail visibly. He only took on tasks he knew he could complete successfully, which meant he never stretched into new territory. We implemented a simple rule: every month, he had to attempt at least one project that was at the edge of his abilities, something with maybe a 50% chance of success. The first few failures were emotionally difficult, but he forced himself to do detailed postmortems on each one. Within a year, his skills had advanced more than in the previous 5 years combined because he was finally exposing himself to the kind of challenges that force growth. Let's discuss a practice that ties together everything we've covered: building a personal knowledge management system. Your brain is powerful but limited. You can only hold a few concepts in working memory at once. You forget most of what you learn unless you systematically combat the forgetting curve. You can't easily recombine ideas from different domains unless you have a system for surfacing relevant connections. High-level thinkers compensate for these limitations by building external systems that augment their biological cognition. A personal knowledge management system is simply a structured way of capturing, organizing, and retrieving the information you're learning. This could be a collection of digital notes, a set of physical notebooks, a database, whatever format works for you. The key is that it's systematic rather than random. When you learn something valuable, you capture it in a standardized format. When you need that information later, you have a reliable method for retrieving it. When you're working on a problem, you can search your knowledge base for relevant past learnings and make novel connections. Here's a specific system that works well: the Zettelkasten method, originally developed by the sociologist Niklas Luhmann. Every time you encounter an idea worth remembering, you write it on a note in your own words. Not copying, but genuinely processing and articulating the concept. Each note should be atomic, containing one idea that can stand alone. Then you link this note to other related notes in your system, creating a web of connected knowledge. Over time, you build up thousands of these linked notes, and the links themselves often reveal insights you wouldn't have discovered through linear thinking. The power of this system emerges from two features. First, the act of writing each note in your own words forces deep processing. You can't write a clear atomic note about something you don't truly understand, so the note-taking process itself exposes gaps in comprehension. Second, the linking process forces you to think about how new information relates to existing knowledge. This creates a rich network of associations that mirrors how your brain actually works and makes it easy to find relevant information when you need it. Implement this starting today. Choose a tool, digital or physical, for your notes. Anytime you learn something worth remembering, create an atomic note. Write the concept in your own words, as if explaining to someone else. Add links to other notes on related topics. Do this consistently for 6 months, and you'll have built an external thinking tool that dramatically amplifies your cognitive capacity. When you're working on a problem, you can query your knowledge base and surface relevant insights from books you read years ago, conversations you had, observations you made. This is how you combat the natural human tendency to forget and rebuild the same understanding repeatedly. There's a meta skill underlying all of this that we haven't explicitly named yet: the ability to think about your own thinking, what psychologists call metacognition. Most people are so embedded in their thought processes that they can't observe them objectively. They have thoughts without noticing the patterns, the biases, the habitual moves their mind makes. High-level thinkers have developed the ability to simultaneously think and watch themselves thinking, to notice when they're falling into cognitive traps and deliberately correct course. This metacognitive awareness is trainable. Start by simply noticing when you're thinking versus when you're reacting. There's a qualitative difference between deliberate analysis and automatic response. When you're reacting, thoughts just appear and you follow them. When you're thinking deliberately, you're consciously choosing what to consider and how to consider it. Throughout your day, catch yourself in moments of reactivity and pause. Notice what triggered the automatic response. Notice the quality of the thoughts that arose. Then consciously shift into deliberate thinking mode. Build on this by developing awareness of your cognitive patterns. Do you tend to catastrophize, imagining worst-case scenarios? Do you engage in black and white thinking, missing the nuanced middle ground? Do you overgeneralize from single examples? Do you confirm your existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence? Everyone has these patterns, but most people don't notice them. Start a list of your personal cognitive tendencies. When you catch yourself in one, note it without judgment. Just, there's that catastrophizing pattern again, or there's that confirmation bias. This simple awareness often disrupts the pattern and allows you to choose a more effective approach. Advanced metacognition involves predicting your own cognitive performance. Before tackling a complex task, ask yourself, what cognitive resources will this require? Am I currently in a state to provide those resources? If you're trying to do deep analytical work when you're tired and stressed, you're setting yourself up for poor performance. High-level thinkers match tasks to cognitive states. They do their most demanding thinking when they're fresh and energized. They handle routine tasks when they're depleted. They know which environments support their focus and which degrade it. This self-knowledge and willingness to optimize the match between task and state creates dramatically better outcomes than just powering through regardless of condition. Let me share a framework that integrates much of what we've discussed: the concept of cognitive load management. Your working memory has strictly limited capacity, roughly 4 to 7 chunks of information at a time. When you exceed this capacity, performance degrades rapidly. You make errors, miss connections, feel overwhelmed. Most people constantly operate at or beyond their cognitive load limit because they haven't learned to manage it strategically. High-level thinkers are masters of cognitive load management. They structure their thinking and their environment to keep their working memory focused on the essential complexity while offloading everything else. Here's how this works in practice. Before tackling a complex problem, they externalize as much as possible. They write out what they know about the situation. They draw diagrams of how components relate. They create lists of constraints and requirements. All of this information is still accessible, but now it's stored externally rather than taking up precious working memory slots. This frees their mind to focus on the actual reasoning required rather than trying to juggle all the background information simultaneously. They also chunk information aggressively. Instead of thinking about 20 separate variables, they group related variables into higher-level categories, reducing 20 items to 4 or 5 chunks. A chess master doesn't think about 32 individual pieces in 64 squares, they think in terms of patterns and structures that chunk dozens of elements into single coherent units. You can do the same with any domain you're learning. As you gain experience, you recognize patterns that allow you to compress complex information into manageable chunks. Practice cognitive load management by being ruthlessly selective about what you try to hold in mind simultaneously. When working on something complex, use external tools liberally: paper, whiteboards, digital documents, whatever works. Get everything out of your head except the specific piece you're actively reasoning about. Notice when you feel mentally overloaded, and respond by externalizing or chunking rather than just trying harder. This approach makes seemingly impossible problems tractable by ensuring your limited cognitive resources are allocated to actual thinking rather than mere information storage. There's a dimension of high-level thinking we need to explore: the ability to reason across different timescales simultaneously. Most people default to thinking on a single timescale, usually the immediate or near term. They ask, "What should I do today?" or "What should I do this quarter?" but they don't integrate short-term actions with long-term trajectories. This creates a fundamental incoherence where daily actions don't compound toward meaningful long-term outcomes. High-level thinkers have developed the ability to hold multiple timescales in mind, making decisions that are optimal not just for the present moment but for 1 year, 5 years, and 20 years from now. This multi-scale thinking requires a specific practice, regularly reasoning at each timescale. Once a day, think about the day ahead. Once a week, think about the month and quarter ahead. Once a month, think about the year ahead. Once a quarter, think about the next 5 years. Once a year, think about the next 20 years. At each timescale, you're asking, given my longer-term goals, what should I focus on at this timescale? The daily thinking is informed by the weekly, which is informed by the monthly, which is informed by the yearly, which is informed by the decadal. This creates alignment across timescales so that your daily actions actually compound toward your long-term vision. Most people resist long-term thinking because it feels abstract and uncertain. Why plan for 20 years from now when so much could change? But the uncertainty is exactly why long-term thinking is crucial. By identifying the direction you want to move, even if you can't predict the specific path, you can make short-term decisions that keep you pointed in the right general direction. Without that long-term compass, your short-term decisions are rudderless, pulled by whatever seems urgent or appealing in the moment. Implement this with a simple hierarchy of documents. Create a 20-year vision document describing the life you want to be living 2 decades from now, the skills you want to have developed, the impact you want to have made, the relationships you want to have built. From that, derive a 5-year plan identifying major milestones that would put you on track toward the 20-year vision. From that, create a 1-year plan with specific achievements that advance the 5-year plan. From that, design your quarter-around projects that move the 1-year plan forward. From that, structure your weeks around actions that complete the quarterly projects. From that, fill your days with tasks that execute the weekly priorities. Now every level of the hierarchy is coherent, and your daily actions have genuine long-term significance. The transformation we're engineering here goes deeper than just thinking better in isolated moments. You're rebuilding your entire relationship with your own mind. Instead of being a passive recipient of whatever thoughts happen to arise, you're becoming the active director of your cognitive life. Instead of accepting your current capabilities as fixed, you're developing them systematically. Instead of being limited by your biological memory and attention, you're augmenting them with external systems. Instead of repeating the same thinking patterns year after year, you're upgrading them continuously. This is what it means to become a high-level thinker. It's not about reaching some final state of perfect cognition. It's about building an identity and lifestyle centered on continuous cognitive development, where improving how you think is as natural and automatic as brushing your teeth. The practices I've outlined in this chapter aren't meant to be temporary interventions you do for a while and then abandon. They're meant to become permanent features of how you operate, integrated so thoroughly into your daily life that you don't think about doing them any more than you think about breathing. Start with the practices that resonate most strongly. Maybe it's spaced repetition for core knowledge. Maybe it's daily reflection. Maybe it's multi-perspective analysis. Maybe it's building your knowledge management system. Choose 2 or 3 practices and implement them with total commitment for 90 days. Don't add more during this period, just master the ones you've chosen. After 90 days, these practices will feel natural, and you can add the next layer. The compound effects of these practices over years are extraordinary. Someone who does 15 minutes of spaced repetition daily, 15 minutes of reflection, 30 minutes of challenging reading, and writes to teach what they're learning will, over a decade, develop cognitive capabilities that seem supernatural to people who don't understand the system behind them. They'll appear to have perfect memory, to learn impossibly quickly, to make brilliant decisions, to see connections others miss. But there's no magic, just consistent application of principles that leverage how human cognition actually works. You now understand these principles. The knowledge is transferred. What determines whether this knowledge changes your life is what you do in the next 24 hours. Will you choose one practice and implement it today? Will you set up your spaced repetition system right now? Will you do a 15-minute reflection session tonight? Will you identify one dense text to start reading tomorrow? The gap between knowing and doing is where most transformation dies. Don't let yours be another casualty of that gap. Choose action, choose consistency, choose to become the thinker you're capable of becoming. Your future self, thinking clearly and powerfully through complex problems that would have paralyzed your current self, will thank you for the choice you make right now.